Sarah's phone buzzed at 2:47 a.m., pulling her from the shallow sleep that had become her nightly routine. Another work email, another crisis that couldn't wait until morning. She rolled over in her cramped Manhattan studio, her body aching despite having spent 8 hours in bed. The red numbers on her clock felt like an accusation. How could she feel this exhausted after what should have been a full night's rest? At 34, Sarah had tried everything. Keto diets that left her irritable and foggy, high-intensity workouts that made her ravenous and stressed, sleep-tracking apps that only confirmed what she already knew. Her mind wouldn't turn off, her heart raced at the smallest notification, and her nervous system seemed permanently stuck in always-on mode. The mirror in her tiny bathroom reflected someone she barely recognized. Dark circles had taken up permanent residence under her eyes, and her clothes fit differently every few months, depending on which diet she'd abandoned and what stress-eating cycle she'd fallen into. Her doctor had mentioned words like cortisol and metabolic markers during their last visit, but the solution always seemed to be the same. Eat less, move more, try harder. Walking to work through the crowded streets of Midtown, Sarah noticed something that had escaped her attention before. On the subway platform, a Japanese woman about her age sat quietly, eyes closed, breathing steadily despite the chaos around her. While everyone else scrolled frantically on their phones or gulped coffee from oversized cups, this woman appeared to exist in a pocket of calm. Her posture was straight but relaxed, her small bag organized, and when she opened her eyes as the train arrived, there was a clarity there that Sarah envied. At the office, Sarah's desk overflowed with the artifacts of her perpetual self-improvement attempts. Protein bars, a fitness tracker that blinked accusingly at her sedentary hours, and a collection of empty supplement bottles promising energy, focus, and metabolism boosts. None of it seemed to address the fundamental exhaustion that colored every aspect of her life. Her colleague Yuki, who had transferred from the Tokyo office 6 months earlier, worked at the desk beside her. Sarah had always been curious about Yuki's habits, how she seemed to maintain steady energy throughout the day, without the dramatic peaks and crashes that defined Sarah's existence. Unlike their American colleagues who ate lunch at their desks while typing furiously, Yuki would disappear for exactly 1 hour, returning calm and refreshed. "I don't understand how you do it," Sarah finally admitted during one particularly brutal afternoon. "You never seem wired or crashed. What's your secret? Do you take something?" Yuki smiled, a gentle expression that held no judgment. "No pills? My grandmother gave me a small rice bowl when I moved here. I use it for every meal. Same size, always. I think you might find it useful." Sarah looked at Yuki's lunch, a bento box with small portions of vegetables, protein and rice, each element distinct and colorful. It seemed impossibly small compared to Sarah's usual grab-and-go salads or protein bars, yet Yuki never appeared hungry or unsatisfied. That evening, Sarah found herself walking past a small Japanese market in her neighborhood, drawn by warm light spilling onto the sidewalk. Inside, shelves held ceramic bowls, teacups, and packages of unfamiliar foods. An elderly Japanese man behind the counter smiled as she examined a simple white rice bowl, no bigger than her cupped hands. "My grandmother always said the bowl chooses the person," he said quietly. "This one seems right for someone learning to listen." Sarah purchased the bowl without fully understanding why, carrying it home in her bag like a secret. Back in her studio apartment, she held it under the harsh LED lights, running her fingers along its smooth edges. It felt substantial despite its small size, warm to the touch even in her cold apartment. She thought about Yuki's calm presence, the woman on the subway, and the persistent exhaustion that had become her normal. Maybe the problem wasn't that she lacked discipline. Maybe she'd been approaching everything wrong, focusing on restriction and intensity, when what she needed was something entirely different, a rhythm her body could actually sustain. If you've ever felt tired even after a full night of sleep or frustrated with diets that don't last, tell us in the comments which part of this story feels familiar. And stay with us for the next chapters. The rice bowl sat on Sarah's kitchen counter for 3 days before she worked up the courage to use it. Her usual breakfast routine involved grabbing a protein bar and oversized coffee on her way to work, eating while walking or on the subway. The idea of sitting down, using a proper bowl, and paying attention to her food felt foreign, almost wasteful of time. On Saturday morning, jet-lagged from another week of late-night emails and early meetings, Sarah found herself staring at the bowl. She cooked a small portion of oatmeal, spooning it carefully into the ceramic vessel. The amount looked almost comically small compared to her usual servings. But as she sat at her tiny table, instead of eating while scrolling through her phone, something unexpected happened. She noticed the texture of the oatmeal, the warmth spreading through the ceramic into her hands, the way her breathing naturally slowed as she focused on each spoonful. Halfway through, she felt a subtle sensation she hadn't experienced in years, satisfaction without fullness, nourishment without the heavy, sluggish feeling that usually followed her meals. At work on Monday, Yuki noticed Sarah's small container of rice and vegetables. "You're using a bowl?" Yuki asked, and Sarah detected approval in her voice. "Your grandmother's bowl idea," Sarah admitted. "I'm not sure I'm doing it right. I feel hungry again after a couple of hours." Yuki nodded knowingly. "In Japan, we call this hara hachi bu. Eat until 80% full. Your stomach needs time to tell your brain it's satisfied. Most Americans eat until 120% full, then feel sick and tired." Over the following weeks, Sarah began experimenting with this concept, using the bowl not just for rice, but for all her meals. Salads, soups, even her occasional indulgences, everything went into the small ceramic vessel. She discovered that foods she'd labeled as forbidden or unhealthy felt different in smaller portions, eaten slowly, with attention. Her friend Maya, a fitness instructor who preached the gospel of extreme calorie restriction and intense workouts, watched Sarah eat lunch from her small bowl during one of their weekend meetings. "That's all you're eating?" Maya asked, eyeing her own massive salad topped with grilled chicken. "No wonder you're losing weight." "I could never survive on portions that small." But Sarah wasn't starving. In fact, she was experiencing something she'd never achieved through restrictive dieting: steady energy throughout the day. The mid-afternoon crashes that usually sent her reaching for sugary snacks or another cup of coffee had diminished. She found herself waking up hungry for breakfast, something that hadn't happened in years of chronic stress eating and late-night binges. Yuki began sharing other small practices from her Tokyo life, how she prepared tea each evening in the same cup, creating a ritual that signaled to her nervous system that the workday was over, how she kept her apartment minimally furnished, not from lack of money, but because visual clutter made her mind feel scattered. "Americans think discipline means fighting yourself," Yuki explained as they walked to a nearby park during lunch. "In Japan, we design our environment so good choices are easy choices. Less fighting, more flowing." Sarah thought about her own apartment, the exercise equipment gathering dust, the kitchen cabinets filled with half-empty supplement bottles and protein powders, the bedroom where her phone charged next to her pillow, buzzing with notifications throughout the night. Everything in her space seemed designed to create stress rather than calm. That weekend, Sarah began what she privately called the Great Simplification. She moved her phone charger to the kitchen, creating a boundary between sleep and screen time. She cleared her counters of everything except the rice bowl, a tea kettle, and a small plant Yuki had given her. Each change felt tiny, almost insignificant, but collectively they began to shift the energy of her living space. The most surprising discovery came 3 weeks into using the bowl consistently. Sarah stepped on her scale, something she'd been avoiding since her last failed diet attempt, and found she'd lost 8 pounds without trying. not through restriction or willpower, but through presence and portion awareness. Her clothes fit better, but more importantly, her mind felt clearer. Her mother called that Sunday, as she did every week, inevitably asking about Sarah's dating life and whether she was taking care of herself. "Mani, you sound different," her mother said during their conversation. "More settled. Are you finally getting enough sleep?" Sarah looked at the rice bowl sitting on her table, still warm from her morning oatmeal. She wasn't sleeping more hours, but she was sleeping more deeply. Her nervous system was learning slowly that not every moment required maximum alertness. "I'm learning some things," Sarah said simply, "about taking up the right amount of space." "Doctor." Martinez spread Sarah's latest blood work across her desk, comparing the numbers to tests from 6 months earlier. Her eyebrows raised slightly, the kind of expression doctors make when results surprise them in a positive way. "Your inflammatory markers are significantly lower," Dr. Martinez said, looking up at Sarah, "and your cortisol levels have normalized. What changes have you made? New medication? Fitness program?" Sarah thought about explaining the rice bowl, the evening tea ritual, the gradual restructuring of her living space to support calm rather than chaos. It all seemed too simple, too quiet to be responsible for the improvements showing up in her bloodstream. "I've been eating differently, sleeping with my phone in another room. Small things." Dr. Martinez nodded approvingly. "Small things often have large impacts. Your body is clearly responding well to whatever you're doing. Keep it up." Walking home from the appointment, Sarah felt a quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with external validation and everything to do with her body finally working with her instead of against her. The changes weren't dramatic or Instagram-worthy, but they were real and sustainable, in a way her previous diet and exercise attempts had never been. At work, however, not everyone appreciated her evolving habits. During a team dinner at an Italian restaurant, Sarah's careful attention to portion sizes and her decision to stop eating when satisfied rather than when her plate was empty drew comments from colleagues. "Come on, Sarah, live a little," laughed Tom from accounting, pushing the breadbasket toward her. "You're making the rest of us look bad with your monk portions." Maya, who had joined them after her evening workout class, was more direct. "I don't understand this Japanese phase you're going through. Just count calories, like a normal person. All this mindful eating stuff is just another trend." Sarah felt the familiar pressure to accommodate others' comfort levels, to abandon her careful attention to her body's signals in favor of social harmony. The old version of herself would have taken the bread, ordered dessert, stayed out late, despite knowing she'd pay for it with poor sleep and morning brain fog. Instead, she smiled and declined politely, excusing herself before the evening devolved into the usual pattern of overconsumption, followed by group complaints about feeling overstuffed and tired. Yuki, who had been quietly observing the interaction, joined Sarah outside the restaurant. "In Tokyo, I had a friend who moved to America for university," Yuki said, as they walked toward the subway. "She told me the hardest part wasn't learning English or academic subjects. It was learning to say no to excess without seeming rude. Americans often mistake self-care for selfishness." The comment stayed with Sarah throughout the following week as she navigated similar situations. The co-worker who brought donuts to every meeting and took offense when people didn't partake. The friend who interpreted Sarah's 10 p.m. boundary for phone calls as rejection rather than sleep hygiene. The family members who saw her smaller portions during Sunday dinner as a judgment of their choices rather than attention to her own needs. Each instance required a small act of courage, prioritizing her nervous system's need for calm over others' expectations, that she participate in collective stress and overconsumption. Some relationships adjusted easily to these boundaries, while others revealed themselves to be built more on shared dysfunction than genuine connection. The rice bowl became a symbol of this new relationship with herself. Using it required slowing down, paying attention, trusting her body's signals rather than external rules about how much she should or shouldn't eat. It represented a fundamental shift from fighting herself to designing her life in support of her well-being. 3 months into this experiment, Sarah realized she hadn't thought about dieting in weeks. The obsessive mental chatter about calories, restriction and willpower had been replaced by a quiet attunement to hunger, satisfaction and energy levels. Food had become nourishment rather than a battlefield. Her sleep had improved dramatically since removing her phone from the bedroom and establishing an evening tea ritual. The small ceramic cup Yuki had recommended, similar in style to the rice bowl, marked the transition from day consciousness to evening wind-down. Preparing the tea mindfully, holding the warm cup, sipping slowly, all signaled to her nervous system that it was safe to begin relaxing. Most surprisingly, Sarah found herself enjoying food more, not less, despite eating smaller quantities. Each meal became an opportunity for presence rather than a rushed interruption to her busy day. The bowl's small size forced her to choose foods that truly nourished her rather than simply filling space on a large plate. Her sister visited from Philadelphia that month, staying in Sarah's newly simplified studio for a long weekend. "Something's different about you," she observed over breakfast, watching Sarah eat oatmeal from the ceramic bowl with complete attention. "You seem, I don't know how to describe it, more like yourself, but calmer." Sarah looked around her apartment. The cleared surfaces, the single plant on the windowsill, the phone charging in the kitchen while they ate breakfast in peace. The space reflected the internal changes. Less clutter, more intentionality, greater ease. "I'm learning to take up the right amount of space," Sarah said, echoing her earlier conversation with their mother. "Not too much, not too little, just right." Would you rather force yourself with willpower or redesign your environment and habits like this character is learning to do? Comment which path makes more sense to you, and share this episode with someone who needs a gentler approach to change. The promotion came with a corner office, a significant salary increase, and expectations that would have thrilled Sarah 6 months earlier. Now, sitting across from her director as he outlined the role's demands, frequent travel, client dinners, 60-hour weeks, she felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. "I know it's a big adjustment," he said, sliding the offer letter across the conference table. "But you've proven you can handle the pressure. We need someone who can grind when necessary." That word, grind, sent a small shiver through her nervous system. She thought about the rice bowl sitting in her desk drawer, the evening tea ritual that had become sacred, the careful sleep boundaries that had finally given her mornings without brain fog. "Can I have a few days to consider?" Sarah asked, surprising herself with the question. The old version of herself would have accepted immediately, despite knowing the cost to her health and well-being. "Of course, but don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often." Walking back to her desk, Sarah felt the weight of a choice that went beyond career advancement. This was about identity, who she was becoming versus who she had been. The promotion would require abandoning the quiet practices that had transformed her relationship with food, sleep, and stress. Yuki looked up from her computer as Sarah sat down heavily in her chair. "Bad news?" Yuki asked, noting Sarah's expression. "Good news that feels complicated," Sarah replied, explaining the promotion offer and its demands. Yuki listened thoughtfully, then shared something that shifted Sarah's perspective entirely. "My father worked for the same company in Tokyo for 30 years, Yuki said. 12-hour days, business dinners, constant travel. He was successful by every external measure, but he aged 10 years for every 5 that passed. When he finally retired, he could barely enjoy it because his body had forgotten how to relax. What changed? He didn't change. His son, my brother, watched what that lifestyle cost and chose differently. Same intelligence, same work ethic, but he designed boundaries that protected his health. He makes less money but sleeps well every night. My father says he wishes he'd been brave enough to make that choice. That evening, Sarah sat in her simplified apartment, holding her teacup and contemplating the decision. The promotion represented everything she'd thought she wanted: recognition, financial security, advancement. But it would require returning to the lifestyle that had left her exhausted, stressed, and disconnected from her own body. She thought about the rice bowl that had started this transformation. Such a simple object, yet it had taught her that less could be more, that boundaries could be nourishing rather than restrictive, that paying attention to internal signals was more reliable than following external pressures. Her phone rang. Maya, calling with her usual evening energy after a high-intensity workout. "I heard about your promotion. When do you start? We should celebrate with that new cocktail place downtown." "Dunai haven't accepted yet," Sarah said, knowing Maya would find this incomprehensible. "What do you mean? It's exactly what you've been working toward." "I'm not sure it's what I want anymore." Maya's silence spoke volumes. In their friendship, wanting less money, less status, less intensity, was considered failure rather than wisdom. "You're being influenced by your Japanese co-worker," Maya said finally. "All this minimalism stuff is fine as a hobby, but this is your career we're talking about." After hanging up, Sarah realized Maya's comment revealed the heart of her dilemma. Was she being influenced by Yuki, or was she finally listening to her own needs? The practices she'd adopted, portion awareness, sleep boundaries, environmental simplicity, weren't culturally foreign concepts imposed on her life. They were responses to her body's consistent requests for less stimulation, more presence, and sustainable rhythms. She pulled out a notebook and began writing, not to convince herself one way or another, but to clarify what she'd learned over the past months. The rice bowl had taught her that enough was a feeling, not a quantity. The evening tea ritual had shown her that transitions needed space and ceremony. The simplified apartment had demonstrated that visual calm supported mental calm. Most importantly, these practices had revealed that her previous assumption that she lacked discipline had been wrong. She had plenty of discipline when her environment supported her goals rather than undermining them. 3 days later, Sarah requested a meeting with her director. "I'm honored by the promotion offer," she began, her hands steady despite her racing heart. "But I'd like to propose a modification. I'll take the role with the understanding that I maintain certain work-life boundaries. No emails after 9 p.m., limited travel to preserve my sleep schedule, and client dinners that end by 8 p.m. when possible." Her director's expression shifted from surprise to consideration. "That's unconventional. What makes you think you can deliver the same results with those restrictions?" "I've learned that taking care of my nervous system isn't selfish. It's strategic. Well-rested employees make better decisions, have stronger relationships with clients, and avoid the costly mistakes that come with chronic stress." It was a risk that could have cost her the opportunity entirely. Instead, after a week of consideration, the company agreed to a 6-month trial period with modified expectations. Sarah celebrated that evening not with cocktails and late-night celebration, but with her usual tea ritual, using the ceramic cup that had become a symbol of her commitment to sustainable practices. The rice bowl sat nearby, ready for tomorrow's breakfast, a daily reminder that taking up the right amount of space was a practice, not a destination. 6 months into her new role, Sarah sat in Dr. Martinez's office reviewing test results that told a story of sustained transformation. Her inflammatory markers remained low, her cortisol levels stable, and her resting heart rate had dropped to levels typically seen in athletes, despite never setting foot in a gym. "I have to ask," Dr. Martinez said, setting down the lab reports. "What specifically changed? I have patients spending thousands on supplements and extreme fitness programs who aren't seeing improvements like this." Sarah considered how to explain that everything had changed because almost nothing had changed. Her days still contained the same basic elements: work, meals, sleep, but the quality of attention she brought to each activity had transformed her biology as dramatically as any medical intervention. "I learned that my nervous system is like a smoke detector," she said finally. "For years, it was going off constantly because my environment kept sending signals of emergency. Late-night phone calls, irregular meals, no boundaries between work and rest. I didn't need to fix my nervous system. I needed to fix the environment that was overstimulating it." This realization had crystallized during a particularly challenging week at work, when multiple client crises threatened to pull her back into old patterns of stress-driven behavior. Instead of pushing through with caffeine and willpower, Sarah had relied on the practices that had become second nature. Each morning, she ate breakfast from the rice bowl while sitting at her table, phone in another room. This simple ritual, 15 minutes of presence before the day's demands, set a tone of calm awareness that carried through even chaotic meetings. When colleagues ordered large portions during working lunches, Sarah continued using smaller plates or bowls, eating slowly while others rushed through their meals. She discovered that this wasn't about restriction, but about listening to her body's actual needs rather than social pressure to consume more. The evening tea ceremony had become non-negotiable, marking the transition from work consciousness to rest mode. The warm ceramic cup in her hands, the ritual of steeping and sipping mindfully, these actions signaled to her nervous system that the day's vigilance could soften into evening calm. Most significantly, her relationship with hunger and satisfaction had completely transformed. Where she'd once swung between restriction and overeating, cycling through diets that promised external control over internal chaos, she now trusted her body's signals with quiet confidence. Yuki, who had been transferred back to Tokyo, visited New York for a business trip and joined Sarah for dinner. They sat in a quiet Japanese restaurant, Sarah automatically requesting a smaller portion size and eating with the deliberate pace that had become natural. "You eat like my grandmother now," Yuki observed with approval. "Not thinking about food all the time, just nourishing yourself when hungry and stopping when satisfied. Very unusual for Americans." "And I realized I'd been fighting my body for years," Sarah replied, setting down her chopsticks when she felt that familiar sensation of gentle fullness. All that talk about willpower and discipline was just code for ignoring internal wisdom in favor of external rules. That evening, alone in her apartment, Sarah reflected on the deeper transformation that had occurred. The rice bowl, which still sat prominently on her kitchen counter, had been the catalyst for understanding that health wasn't about perfection or extremes. It was about daily practices that honored her body's actual needs rather than forcing it to comply with arbitrary standards. She thought about Maya, who had grown distant as Sarah's lifestyle shifted away from their shared patterns of stress, overscheduling, and weekend recovery cycles. Some friendships, Sarah had learned, were built on mutual dysfunction rather than genuine support. Her family had gradually adjusted to her boundaries around phone calls, visit schedules, and food choices during gatherings. The initial resistance, questions about whether she was okay, or comments about her new rules, had given way to acceptance and, in some cases, curiosity about her approaches. Most surprisingly, her relationship with food had become almost boring in the best possible way. The mental chatter that had once dominated her thoughts, calculations about calories, guilt over choices, anxiety about her appearance, had been replaced by simple attunement to hunger, satisfaction, and energy. The rice bowl had taught her that portion control wasn't about deprivation, but about precision. Like a meditation bell or prayer beads, it served as a tool for presence, drawing her attention to the current moment rather than past regrets or future anxieties about her body. Looking back, Sarah could see that her transformation hadn't required dramatic lifestyle changes or superhuman discipline. It had required designing an environment that supported her nervous system's need for predictability, calm, and boundaries. The practices she'd learned weren't specifically Japanese or foreign, they were simply human responses to the universal need for rhythm, rest, and mindful attention. What had seemed like cultural wisdom was actually biological wisdom that any body would respond to when given consistent, gentle care. As she prepared for sleep, following the ritual that had become as automatic as brushing her teeth, Sarah realized that the most profound change hadn't been in her weight, energy, or blood markers, though all had improved dramatically. The most profound change had been in her relationship with herself, from adversary to ally, from fighting to flowing. 2 years later, Sarah stood in her new apartment, larger now, with space for a proper dining table and a small meditation corner, preparing breakfast with the same rice bowl that had started her transformation. The ceramic was slightly chipped at the rim from daily use, but its function remained unchanged, a daily reminder that enough was a feeling, not a quantity. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Martinez. "Your latest labs are excellent. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. See you in 6 months instead of 3. The appointment had been routine, annual blood work that continued to show stable, healthy markers. But Sarah remembered the anxiety that used to accompany medical visits, the shame around numbers that never seemed to improve despite her various attempts at extreme intervention. Her work life had found a sustainable rhythm within the modified promotion she'd negotiated. The boundaries she'd insisted upon, no late-night emails, limited travel, reasonable client dinner hours, had initially raised eyebrows but had proven effective. Her calm presence in high-stress meetings and her ability to make clear decisions without emotional reactivity had earned respect from colleagues and clients alike. Maya had called the previous week, the first contact in months. Her voice carried a weariness that Sarah recognized from her own past. "I'm exhausted," Maya admitted. "I'm working out harder than ever, eating cleaner than ever, and I feel worse than I did 5 years ago. I keep thinking about that rice bowl thing you were doing. Did it actually work? Or was that just a phase?" Sarah had invited Maya for dinner, serving a simple meal on regular plates. No need to emphasize the bowl unless Maya showed genuine curiosity. They'd eaten slowly, talking about the difference between pushing through exhaustion and working with their body's natural rhythms. "I thought you'd gotten soft," Maya said as they finished eating, "but you seem more solid, like you're living from the inside out instead of trying to force yourself from the outside in." It was an accurate observation. Sarah's relationship with her body had transformed from antagonistic to collaborative. Instead of fighting hunger, she listened to it. Instead of forcing herself through fatigue, she honored her need for rest. Instead of using willpower to override her nervous system's signals, she designed her environment to support calm, sustainable choices. Her mother visited monthly now, their relationship deeper since Sarah had established gentle boundaries around food commentary and lifestyle advice. During their last visit, her mother had asked to see the rice bowl, holding it carefully in her hands. "Such a simple thing," her mother had mused, "but I can see why it matters to you. It's about paying attention, isn't it?" The observation had moved Sarah more than any dramatic weight loss or fitness transformation could have. Her mother, who had struggled with her own relationship with food and body image for decades, was beginning to understand that health wasn't about perfection, but about presence. Sarah's apartment reflected the same principles as her eating habits: simple, intentional, designed for calm rather than stimulation. The phone still charged in the kitchen overnight. Her bedroom remained a sanctuary for rest, and her evening tea ritual marked the daily transition from engagement to recovery. The practices that had once felt foreign or forced had become as natural as breathing. She no longer thought about portion sizes because the bowl had retrained her perception of appropriate amounts. She no longer struggled with bedtime boundaries because her nervous system had learned to trust the rhythms she'd established. Most surprisingly, food had become simultaneously more pleasurable and less significant in her life. Without the drama of restriction and rebellion, meals had settled into their proper role as nourishment rather than entertainment, punishment, or reward. Her colleagues occasionally commented on her sustained energy and steady mood, asking about supplements or fitness routines. Sarah would mention the bowl, the evening tea, the phone boundaries, practices that seemed almost disappointingly simple compared to the complex programs most people sought. But she'd learned that simple didn't mean easy. Maintaining these boundaries required daily choice, especially in a culture that equated busyness with importance and excess with celebration. Each time she declined a late dinner that would disrupt her sleep, chose a smaller portion despite social pressure, or prioritized her evening ritual over social plans, she was choosing herself over others' expectations. On quiet Sunday mornings, Sarah would sit with her tea, looking at the rice bowl that had started everything, such a small object to carry such significance. But she'd learned that transformation often came through tiny, consistent actions rather than dramatic gestures. The bowl had taught her that discipline wasn't about force, but about design, that health wasn't about perfection, but about attention, that her body wasn't an adversary to be conquered, but a wise teacher offering guidance if she could learn to listen. As she prepared her breakfast, oatmeal, fruit, a small portion that would nourish without overwhelming, Sarah reflected on how profoundly her life had changed through practices that appeared almost unremarkable from the outside. The real transformation wasn't visible in before and after photos, but in the quiet confidence with which she moved through her days, trusting her body's wisdom instead of fighting it. The rice bowl would continue to sit on her counter, chipped but essential, a daily reminder that taking up the right amount of space, not too much, not too little, was a practice that extended far beyond food into every aspect of a life lived with awareness and intention. If this story reminded you that real transformation comes from small habits repeated over time, not from overnight fixes, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to start this journey with you in the next story.